Hello everybody, welcome to today's video. Hopefully you're all having amazing creative days. Today we're going to be talking about the EOS R, and we're going to be talking about the settings I use with the camera to shoot natural light portraits. And this is just going to be like a little beginner introduction kind of stuff. I'm not going to go too in depth. This is more aimed towards people who just picked up the EOS R and they're upgrading from, let's say, shooting with an iPhone or an M50 or something like that, and they want to shoot with the EOS R and they're kind of unsure about what to do. So this video is for you. All right, so I'm going to use this photo right here to sort of illustrate how I set up my camera for natural light portraits. And this was a fun shoot. Canadian swimsuit designer Vasko Swimwear hired me to shoot photos for her new collection. And yeah, the concept was just shooting the models in bikinis on a boat, and it was a lot of fun. I chose to go with this setup right here, actually. This is the EOS R. We have an EF to RF adapter and the 35mm f1.4. And this lens, the EF version, you can find this used online for a really good price right now. It's still a little bit on the higher range, but value for money, I think this is an absolutely fantastic lens. I love it. And the reason I went with the 35mm focal length for this boat shoot is, you know, we're on a boat, there's other people, we have models, makeup artists, the captain, stuff everywhere, bags of things, bags of bikinis and things like that. So I found like a wider angle lens would be just too wide and you'd capture everything, and I don't want to see everything. I wanted to like focus on the product. And with the f1.4 of the lens, I could sort of blur the background and just have the product in focus, because when you're shooting commercial shots, you don't want to have too many distractions. You want the attention of the viewer just to focus on what it is that you want them to see. So that's why I went with the 35. The other reason is the 35, even though it's a fixed focal length, is kind of like 3 lenses in one, because you can get close to a subject and you can get a portrait, like head and shoulders kind of shot. You can step back and you can get like a full body, and you can step even further back and get an environmental portrait. So even though it's a fixed focal length of 35mm, it acts like a zoom lens, because you can shoot 3 distinct different styles with one lens. And the only other focal length you can really do that with is a 28mm, which is pretty close to 35, except, you know, just a touch wider. So for this shot here, what I wanted to do is create a flow from top right to bottom left of the model, sort of lean back on that little seating area or couch on the boat. And of course with the boat you don't have much space, so I had to sort of hang off the back of the boat. I was holding on with a rope at times just so I can get far enough back to get the models. But for this shot here, I was just holding on kind of close to the model, pointing down at her, and it was all shot with natural light. So the trick here is with the settings with the EOS R is obviously use manual mode or aperture priority mode or something like that. I would strongly recommend, if you're new to the camera, use manual mode as much as possible so you can just get used to all those settings. And what you want to do, well, actually before I even talk about the settings, let's talk about how dynamic range works on the EOS R. And with cameras like Sony, you have dynamic range on the light side and the dark side. But with Canon, you have all the dynamic range on the dark side. So what's super important here is that you focus on the highlights of the image. You want to make sure that the bright spots are exposed properly. So in this case, for here, I was exposed on the model's face, and the palm of her hand is pretty bright. So I was taking my exposure readings there, and then anything that was dark, I sort of just brought back up. But there's a lot of natural light coming in, and the boat's white, so light's bouncing around everywhere, and it's acting as a little bit of a fill and a reflector. But yeah, so that's just one thing you got to know if you're shooting weddings, for example, or yeah, weddings is actually perfect because you got the groom in black and you got the bride in white, and obviously that's super contrasty. So if you're shooting weddings with the Canon EOS R or any Canon camera for that matter, focus on the bride's dress. Try and make sure the bride's dress is exposed properly, and then the groom can be a little darker, and then you bump the shadows in post and you can recover a lot of that. And one of the settings I want to talk about here is called highlight tone priority. And what that does is it'll bump your ISO up to 200 automatically, so you're going to be shooting at a little higher ISO. But what it will do is it'll preserve the tones in the highlights. So it'll sort of prevent your camera from blowing out the highlights. So in this situation, it was definitely on because I didn't want to blow out the highlights, and it just allows the texture in the highlights just to be preserved. You know, it's just like a safety net so you don't mess it up. And then of course all the shadows you just bump up in post. So if you're shooting natural light portraits, I strongly recommend highlight tone priority. Now there's one more setting above highlight tone priority. It is called I don't remember, I'm gonna put it right here, but you can't have both of the settings on at the same time. So if highlight tone priority is on, the other one has to be off. And if the other one's on, you won't be able to access highlight tone priority. So if you can't figure out how to turn on highlight tone priority, it's probably because you have the other setting on. So I just want to mention that. And yeah, so let's take a look at the shot here on the computer. This is the raw file right here. And you can see here the colors are a little bit muted, the contrast is low, it doesn't look polished. And for a lot of people, when you're used to shooting with iPhones or some kind of automatic camera, everything comes out of the camera looking great. But when you're using professional cameras, you get raw files and you have to adjust the raw files. So hopefully you guys know that. So here we go. This is the area I exposed for. I want the palm of the hand is always a little bit lighter skinned than the rest of the skin tone. So you want to expose for that. And you can see here on the couch, it's slightly borderline, maybe overexposed-ish, but it's pretty bright here. It came out pretty hot, but the skin and everything is exposed properly. And of course for composition here, top left, bottom right. And this is the final shot. And you can see here, the 35mm f1.4 is crazy sharp. Like, look at all the details. You can see all the eyelashes, everything. It's awesome. Except for this, right here, you can see this dark line on the model's wrist from where her hairband was. Hashtag photographer problems. Photographers hate hairbands. Now, as a photographer, like, how many times have you gone to a photo shoot and like 15, 20 minutes into the shoot, you're like, oh my God, the model's still wearing the hairband on the wrist. So as like a general policy for me, anytime I see hairbands, I'm like, no, take that off, put it in your bag, don't wear it. If it's not on your hair, it's not on your body. And yeah, I should probably Photoshop this out. You can't really see, well, yeah, you can see it when you zoom out too. I didn't notice that before, but yeah, there you go. Photographer problems. But yeah, overall, I'm really happy with this image. It came out really nice and sharp. This 35mm, like I said, awesome deal if you can find one. Okay, and since you're here, check this out. If we get out of here and we scroll up a little bit, I was taking some test shots with a 50mm vintage lens. This is an FD 50 1.8, and they're known to be super kind of soft, and there's a lot of halation, so you can see like the softness and the glow around everything. And check out the character on that lens, right? That is awesome. And like, these ones weren't even focused. The boat's moving, I'm moving. So I mean, shooting with a vintage lens on a moving boat, maybe not the best idea. But yeah, those are some vintage shots. But overall, really happy with this, and so is the client. All right, so a little recap here. If you're shooting natural light portraits with the EOS R, try and shoot in manual mode. It's not too hard. I know if you're coming from, like, let's say you're an iPhone shooter, a point and shoot kind of camera shooter, you're used to everything being in automatic all the time. But try and put the camera in full manual and see what happens. I mean, you only have 3 settings to play with. You have shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. And if you think about it, there's 3 correct exposures for every image, because you have 3 variables, right? So you can just move around each variable to whatever you want and just figure it out as you go. I would always start with aperture first. Shutter speed, obviously, if you're shooting handheld, you want it to be double the focal length. So this is the 35mm, so you want your shutter speed to be 60 plus. But as a general rule of thumb, I try and keep my shutter speed around 100 all the time. And of course, here with this shot, we shot at the shutter speed was 1,250th of a second, because obviously the faster the shutter speed, the less light gets in and you cut out light. And we're shooting in bright natural sunlight here, so the shutter speed was super fast to try and cut down the amount of light coming into the camera. You can also use ND filters with that too, or polarizers will cut the amount of light as well. But try and shoot in manual, it's not too hard. And of course, expose for the highlights, that's always important, and then bring up the shadows in post. And highlight tone priority is a must, in my opinion, if you're shooting in bright natural light. So hopefully this is a little basic introduction to shooting in natural light, and it helps you out with your photography. And yeah, if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, leave a comment down below, and let me know what you think of the video. And let me know if you want to know some more basic skills with the EOS R. All right, thanks for watching. Peace out. I'll see you guys in the next video.